You have to sacrifice money to pay, to sacrifice time that you have to spend.
You said you're a criminal defense lawyer. Wow, that's amazing.
The whole gamut of crimes, so from white collar all the way down to the smallest crimes. Then you'd always have visitors who'd be here for extended periods of time. Hadra Gracie, Braulio Estima, Hamid Bahal, even private after class, it just depends.
That's awesome. Well, Professor Jason, I appreciate you sitting down with me.
Of course, absolutely.
We're here at Renzo Gracie Academy in
Yes.
New York City, and you are a professor here. Why don't we take it back all the way to the beginning, before jiu-jitsu, before everything, and where were you originally from? Where did you grow up at?
From Baltimore originally.
Okay, no way.
Yeah, so I went to school in Baltimore, and then I eventually moved to New York City in 1996 for college.
Okay, gotcha. Where'd you go to school?
I went to Columbia.
Columbia. What did you study at Columbia?
I did political science and pre-med, and I ended up actually getting pretty far into my applications for medical school. But then I kind of realized that it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, so I ended up taking the LSAT and then going to law school instead.
Oh, no kidding. Did you go to law school in the city as well?
Yeah, I went to Cardozo Law School, also in the city.
Wow. That's really cool. So 96, you said?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And then what were you doing before going to school? Were you working at all? Were you training any other sports? Did you grow up playing sports?
Yeah, I grew up playing sports all my life. The school I went to, you had to play a sport every season. So there was fall, winter, and spring. So in the fall, I played soccer. In the winter, there were only a couple options when I first started. There was wrestling, basketball, and swimming. I ended up just gravitating towards wrestling. So I ended up doing that from, I think, like third grade or second grade all the way through high school. But I was terrible at it. Like, it was a thing where I hated it, but all my friends did it. So I had a good friend group which did it. But like, the conditioning was tough. It was tough on my body, and I just didn't really enjoy it. Then after that, I kind of abandoned it a bit. I went in the spring, I did crew, so rowing, and I was recruited as an athlete for Columbia on the crew team. So I ended up doing that for 4 years, but I was still friends with wrestlers in general. So I knew the Columbia wrestling team well. I knew the coaches. So even after I graduated, I was there a lot. So they helped me with some wrestling, and I started to like it a little bit more.
Gotcha. And when did you get first introduced into jiu-jitsu?
So it would have been second semester of my senior year, so January of 2000. One of my friends told me about that he'd saw a flyer for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which, people knew about it because of the UFC, but it still was kind of really small back then. And we saw that there was a club at the university. So we were like, hey, let's go check it out. And I immediately fell in love with it. Matt Serra was my first instructor. He was teaching the club at the time. And then about a year later, he opened some schools, so like Huntington and Babylon. I think he only has one of the schools now. And I ended up taking over the club as a blue belt. And I taught that until about 2020 when the pandemic hit. My schedule changed a bit, but I taught there for about 18 or 19 years. Wow,
no kidding. That's awesome. So you started originally training jiu-jitsu with Matt Serra.
Correct. But what happened is a lot of the students there were going to Renzo's also. So after my first week, they invited me to go down just because I loved it so much. So I started training at Renzo's pretty much right away in January of 2000.
Okay, wow. So January 2000 is when you first got here and you started training at Renzo's.
Yep, and I've always been at Renzo's, yeah.
No kidding, ever since then.
Yep, ever since then, yeah.
That's amazing. What was the room like back then, the training room like between like all the guys here? Because I know that was kind of like the start of all of the, greatness of where we are today in Renzo's. Kind of touch on like who was here and how the training rounds were.
Yeah, so it was really amazing. It was just really, there were only a couple of classes during the day. This is before there was a morning class. So essentially there was like a noon class and then a night class. But the night class, which was all taught by Renzo, was not a class where you had like, a 6 p.m. and a 7 p.m. and an 8 p.m. class. It was just a class that started at 6 p.m. And then it usually went to like 9:30 or 10 o'clock. And it had this basic class structure. You come in, warm up with some takedowns. Renzo would show some takedowns. Then we would do some moves on the ground, do some positional training, maybe the king of the hill. And then after that, everyone would train and the class would ostensibly over. But people would train for many hours after that. Renzo would tell stories. We'd go out to dinner afterwards. So it was a really cool environment to be in. When I first came, I think that Matt Serra might have been a purple belt. Ricardo Almeida was a brown belt. Rodrigo Gracie was a brown belt. And then John Danaher and Sean Williams, they were blue belts at the time. And it was just one of those things when you look up to the purple belts, you thought there was no way you would ever get to purple belt. And it was great just because there were so many people visiting all of the time. So during that time, a lot of the people were fighting in Pride and eventually the UFC. And you always had a lot of great visitors coming through. Eventually, things changed. We got the new academy here, and you had Daniel Gracie, Igor, Hollis, Gregor come through as well, and they were great instructors here for many years before they opened their own schools. Then you'd always have visitors who'd be here for extended periods of time, like Hadra Gracie, Braulio Stima, Hamilou Bahal, even Nino Shembri back in the day. So it was really cool to see so many great people training together, as well as teaching classes and helping us out.
Yeah, I imagine that's inspiring.
Yeah.
As a lower belt, looking up to all these higher belts, not just higher belts, but legends in the sport, right? Foundational legends that kind of built the sport and made it what it is. How did that affect your training and your mentality? Did that motivate you to continue training every day, or did you kind of get smashed in the beginning and where you're like, whoa, I know you mentioned you didn't even think you could get to purple belt. So what was that like on your mentality training with all these guys? Did it motivate you, or did it kind of make you intimidated?
Yeah. So I think it was a thing where what was so great about the people there is they really taught you how to learn as well as taught you how to train properly. So I was lucky where, I'm smaller, so I may not be the best training partner for them when they're fighting certain matches, but they made it so no matter what, like each person could be useful. So let's say someone's training for a fight and they have a bunch of tough rounds. I would get called in to, let's say, just take the mounted position, and I would just have to try to hold them in mount. They'd have to try to escape when they were already exhausted, or I would take the back. And so it really taught me how to train with people properly, how to be able to help people train for competition. And I learned so much from them. Even though you get smashed, you learn things, but also they can teach you things in other ways when it comes to being a good training partner. So I think that was the biggest lesson. So the jiu-jitsu is something where there's technique, but there's also being a good training partner. And I think that sometimes people get that competitive edge where they aren't really thinking about the other person so much, or how they can help the person develop, or how you can keep them safe. And you end up, having a bad role. And I think that lesson of being a good training partner was something that I got from them, which was really great.
That's awesome. Did you have that mindset when you first started training at a white belt and blue belt, or did that kind of develop over the years once you got into, purple, brown, and black?
I think they drilled into us so early, that discipline, the respect, and then the mentorship that we received. So, you're getting great technique, but you're also being taught how to learn properly, how to explore positions, how to be patient, how to work out certain problems. And that, I think, was the most useful, because right now there's a lot of great resources out there, and you have to kind of cull through them. And I think it's great that there's YouTube, there's Instagram, the instructional market has blown up, which I think is actually, these are resources that we didn't have back then. You'd get a grainy VHS tape that someone brought from somewhere that you can watch old Mondials matches, or maybe an old instructional where they showed 4 moves, and you'd be like, oh my goodness, we just got to watch this. But now there's all these resources, but it's more important to be able to learn how to learn.
Right. Yeah, I agree 100%. That's a skill in itself, right? Learning how to learn, especially in jiu-jitsu. How did your training change over the years? When you started training, I know white belts and blue belts, they like to train aggressively, and it's kind of hard to control yourself a little bit.
Right.
When did that, control start to incorporate into your game? When did you start to feel like, okay, I have more control over my rounds, and I'm seeing these positions a little more slowly and really working through the fundamentals?
Yeah, so I think that what happens for every white belt is they have no skill at all, and they just have whatever attributes they have, whether it's flexibility, strength, speed, or just, for lack of a better term, it's toughness to try to tough through things. I think that, just the environment I was in back then, you were just always getting beat by people that were so far above you that you really couldn't do anything, that you could either just resist against that, or you could be patient and then look for small victories. So it was almost like I was forced to do it that way, where there was no other option. It was either you quit or you just be patient. And then if you have a little victory, it's almost you have to reframe what victory means. One easy way to look at it is, okay, this person I trained with, he tapped me 7 times this round. This round I got tapped 6 times. I don't know if that's the best way to look at it, but it's an easy way to articulate it. But another thing is, this person got his knee into this position this time. This time I recognized that was where things were going south, and I was able to keep that knee away. I've learned something, and then that's a minor victory. So if I can have a round where I don't just spaz out and I avoid submissions, but I've actually learned something technical to protect myself or not get swept, then I think it's almost like a reframing of things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Reframing victory.
Yeah, and the tough part is it's you're gonna, as you know from training jiu-jitsu, you're gonna take beatings throughout, even at black belts. I still take beatings, of course. Everyone's so good these days. Young kids coming through, people senior to me, people that are my peers. It's still very hard, but if you're able to reframe what you're trying to get out of training, it helps you get better because then you can actually have something you're getting better at, and also reframing what victory is.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Reframing victory is huge for me. I remember when I first started, I would just make goals like, I'm not going to get tapped today.
Right.
I try not to get tapped by anybody today.
Right.
And sometimes it would happen. I would go in and I wouldn't get tapped and I would leave and I would be excited.
Right.
But you always get tapped and it's just a part of the game. How has jiu-jitsu changed your mindset, not only on the mats, but off the mats as well? How has it changed your lifestyle and who you are as a person?
Yeah, I think one thing about jiu-jitsu that a lot of people talk about is how it teaches you a lot of like life lessons. It's very rewarding in many ways, and some of it's ephemeral, but I think it's unique to each person, but there are things that are commonalities across the board for everyone. And just the coming in the first place is intimidating. The discipline to be able to come in and do this. And then also the idea of like the sacrifice. You have to sacrifice money to pay, to sacrifice time that you have to spend. You know, a lot of people make a joke. It's like, I'm going to go train for an hour. Well, yeah, you have to get there. You train, you hang out a bit, then you may have lunch. It's like 5 hours later, and it's like it's all gone.
Right.
But I think it's the biggest thing I think for me is connecting with other people deeply. It's like that sense of community that we all talk about. That was the biggest thing for me. Like I played sports all my life, so I knew about how you have to make sacrifices. You have to be disciplined in certain things. You have to work hard, you know. But the idea of connecting with people deeply, because when you are on the mat, you have to trust them. They have to trust you. You can only get better with other people. I think that was the biggest thing. And I've made so many friends, countless friends here from all walks of life. People that I'll have friendships for many, many years. That have lasted 20 years. I've trained 25 years up to this month.
Oh,
and
wow,
I'll have
no way.
friendships that last beyond until I'm old and I'm in the grave. So
That's amazing. Long-lasting friendships and long-lasting relationships are huge. And I think that's a big thing that draws people back to the mats is the sense of community. Like you said, you have people here that really care about you and hold you accountable to come every day and want to see you happy and do well in your life, And speaking of life, kind of off the mats, I wanted to, get a picture of your life off the mats. So what do you do for work? What does a day in the life of, Professor Jason look like?
Yeah, so actually I am now just teaching jiu-jitsu full time. Amazing. So it's in about a year now. So I was a criminal defense attorney for 10 years. Then I got into whole animal butchery and I did that for 10 years. And it was about time for me to make a change. And I ended up teaching here full time. And it's been great. The administration's been really great to me. The students have been receptive. My peers have been really, really supportive, helping me, giving me tips. So I had taught, throughout this entire time, either covering classes for people, whether they had to go to fights or they had to go coach people. So I've always been sort of teaching this whole time. But it's been nice to kind of devote my time to this now.
That's awesome. So you said you were a criminal defense lawyer. Wow, that's amazing. In New York City?
Yes, yeah.
How was that? I mean, I'm sure you.
Yeah, really cool. Yeah. So we did state and federal trial and appellate work, the whole gamut of crimes. So from white collar all the way down to the smallest crimes, and it was really exciting. It was a really great place to practice law. There's a lot of great lawyers in the city. A lot of big cases come through here. So it was a really great experience. And I loved it at the time, but my boss was planning on retiring in a few years and wanted me to take over the firm. And for me, even though I loved it at the time, I realized that looking at people who were 10 years older than me, it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. So that I got an opportunity to go into whole animal butchery, breaking down carcasses and just learning about that. So it was kind of nice to make a change where I did something more hands-on, where oftentimes you have like a deeper connection with the community, whether it's the farmer, with the local markets, or getting meat to people that they have to use for sustenance. And that was really great. It was a very rewarding experience. I did that for 10 years. I also taught butchery as well. And then, I reached a certain point in that career where this made sense, just because I realized I was in the butcher shop 5-6 days a week, but I was in the academy 6 days a week anyway. So this has been a nice change.
Wow, criminal defense to whole animal butchery to jiu-jitsu. That's three super different careers, but very exciting nonetheless. How did you kind of get incorporated into whole animal butchery from criminal defense? Because they're so different, you know what I'm saying? So what made you transition over? Yeah, so my wife and I became interested in where our food came from and food systems. We realized that there's a big problem with industrialized meat in the United States, and it's also kind of spreading across the world, whether it comes to impact on the environment, health, as well as animal welfare. So we started doing some research, and there was an opportunity for me to do an apprenticeship, essentially, where I could learn how to butcher. And then I didn't know if I was going to like it. I didn't know if I was going to be good at it.
and I ended up falling in love with it, and I was lucky to get employed right away. And it was just really nice to do something a little bit different, So I think the one thing is, like, a lot of people think it's like, oh, crazy changes. You went to college for this, and then you went to law school, then you became a lawyer, then you went to butchery, and then now you're doing jiu-jitsu. But I think that every single thing you've done in your life kind of leads you to where you are now, but also helps you get to where you are. I think that, the legal training helped me in many regards when it came to butchery, just being able to talk about certain things or analyze certain things when it comes to meat, just because there's meat science as well. Then there's also the technical aspect of the physicality of breaking something down with technique, and jiu-jitsu helped me a lot with that too. I made countless notes with butchery, but I made notes with jiu-jitsu, and step by step how to do things really helped me with that. So I kind of took something from law when it came to thinking about things, as well as public speaking, and then the technical aspects of jiu-jitsu, breaking down moves. And then I was able to teach butchery to many, many butchers, because you were able to talk about it intelligently and clearly, as well as being able to teach them using techniques that I learned from jiu-jitsu, just because everyone approaches things differently. Some people are more visual, some people have to see it a different way. People that have physical limitations and need to do things differently, whether it's size. If you have a very small person, even though there's a concentration of force in the knife, which kind of is a force multiplier, being able to show something somewhat different, just because their body type, they're too tall to bend down like that. They're too short to really reach, or they don't have the upper body strength to pull in a certain way. Was really helpful.
Wow, you don't even think about how similar butchery and jiu-jitsu are until you hear someone
right.
break it
Yeah,
down
exactly.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all about leverage, technique. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's like the same thing where jiu-jitsu applies to almost everything in life, is
right.
what they say, and that's very apparent there. So that leads me to my next question. I'm very interested in sourcing the best quality food that I can get for myself. I really believe in quality meats, quality fruits and vegetables, organic, grass-fed. For someone that is interested in sourcing, the best quality food for themselves, where would you shoot them? Like, what direction would you send them in? Like myself, it's tough because you go to the grocery store and it's not the greatest options that we have to choose from. So from your perspective, someone who's kind of been hands-on in that industry, what would you say to look for with picking your meats and stuff like that?
Sure, of course. So the problem is labeling is like so confusing here. I mean, you see things like all natural, which, when you look at the federal statute, what it has to mean, or certain things, or even organic has changed a lot here. Like in the EU, it's a lot higher standards than here. And there's been a lot of legislation that's actually changed the organic standards to be to the point where you're like, man, do I really want to be eating that? I think you're still better off than eating commercial, whether it's fruits and vegetables or meat. But even then, it can be difficult. I think the easiest thing to do is to look to smaller purveyors, and you kind of have to put some effort forward where you actually go and do your research and you go meet them and talk to them. When you go to these small shops, whether you're buying your meat or fish or vegetables, you usually can have an instant connection. You kind of tell if someone's telling you the truth or isn't telling you the truth. And you can ask certain questions about, like, where do you get this? What's the farm's name and things like that. And you can even go to the length of visiting the farm or calling the farm up. They love to see people. And I think that oftentimes we just don't do our own due diligence. But I think that people are smart enough when you talk to someone and they are kind of shaky on their information, or it's obvious they don't know what they're talking about. They're trying to obfuscate something. Doesn't mean they're doing something bad. I mean, everyone runs businesses. They have to make money. But you can tell that it may not be exactly what you want to get. So I think that finding small shops, you could even just research if you were looking for meat, like whole animal butcher shop is a great start. Just because it's not whole animal doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Some places don't have the capacity to break down whole carcasses, or it doesn't work for them from a cost or infrastructure perspective. So they may be getting what's called boxed meat, which has a bad name. When you think of conveyor belts making all these boxes from Kansas or Iowa, and then the meat gets shipped and you don't know where it came from. But oftentimes small purveyors or small shops can't really break everything down. So they go to a farm directly, and then they have it broken down, and they're getting that whole animal, but it just comes in the boxes instead of the whole carcass. So I think it's just a little bit of research on the consumer's part can really go a long way.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. That's amazing. So like sourcing from smaller butcher shops and farmers markets and stuff like that is definitely essential. So what is your favorite cut of meat? If you're eating a steak, if you can, you have unlimited budget and you're going to the butcher shop, what are you buying?
Yeah. So for me, it rotates a lot. I think for me, my favorite would probably be top sirloin. There's a lot of different components in that muscle. It comes from the rump or the hip area. The rump cap is a favorite of many people in the academy, the picanha. So it's really tasty. The fat is really good. I mean, it's like a conjoining of like words like to poke in the butt, basically, because when you had cowboys back in the day, they would like push the animals along with a stick to kind of move them around. So it's kind of like poking them there. But the fat there is really great. It's a really great muscle, a little bit leaner on the inside, but it's a nice fat cover. And for me, it's a perfect confluence of like flavor, texture, and then level of tenderness. So any muscles that get worked more are going to generally be tougher, but have more flavor because you have compounds being deposited there, whether it's in the lipids or in the muscles. And it'll often be like a darker red, so it's more flavorful meat, but it's slightly tougher. If you have a very tender meat, oftentimes it'll be a little less flavorful. So if you have filet mignon and you have the psoas muscle here, and it basically it's a free ride on a four-legged animal because they're on all fours. It's a super tender piece of meat. It's a great piece of meat, super expensive, really well prized here in America, not in all other countries. It's going to have less flavor. But then if you had something like a brisket or a short rib or a shank, things that bear weight, that get worked a lot more, they're going to be a little bit tougher. But if you cook them properly, they'll be just as tender as a tenderloin. You just have to know how to cook it properly, but the flavor is a lot different. I think a lot of people think about beef just tastes like beef. Chicken just tastes like chicken. But every muscle, even two muscles that are next to each other, will have a slightly different texture, slightly different flavor. So for me, top sirloin is great because it's a little bit leaner just throughout the muscle itself. Has fat cover if you want it, but just the texture, flavor, and tenderness kind of all conjoined for me, like the juiciness and everything. I think most people here in this country favor tenderness above all else, and like flavor might be right there. But for me, I'm willing to chew just a tiny bit more and then have like a more satisfying, juicier steak.
Yeah, picanha is amazing. I love the picanha.
Yeah,
Top
really, really
sirloin
tasty.
as well.
Yeah.
Two really, really good cuts. That's awesome. How do you cook them?
For me, so it depends. Like if I'm doing a top sirloin roast, I like roasting the whole thing, kind of like doing a roast beef. Otherwise, I'll usually use a cast iron pan to either cut the whole steak and the whole picanha into steaks, and then put fat side down to kind of you get the fat really nice and crispy, and then start searing them. So I'm cooking it in the fat without any other oils or butter or anything like that. But usually just cast iron pan. But if I do a whole picanha, then I'll roast the whole thing. My favorite to do at home, I have a smoker, is a smoked picanha. So smoking is really, really nice. And then once I smoke it, I'll sear the fat afterwards. And then you get nice, like beautiful red stripes of meat with the yellowish fat. And a little bit of smoky flavor is great.
Oh, I'm going to need to get some steak after this.
Yeah.
I'm getting hungry now after we just trained. So
yeah.
I'm getting really hungry. But that sounds amazing. How has your diet changed over the years since when you were a child, when you were a teenager, and then growing into your early adult years versus now? How has your diet, kind of evolved, or is it the same?
It's pretty much the same. My mom cooked great all the time for us. My dad cooked for us as well. So just like a basic carb, like rice or something, some vegetables, and just a various type of meat. And I've kind of just eaten that way through my entire life. I don't think I necessarily have like a health conscious diet. Like I'll have a cheeseburger, I'll have pizza. Obviously, if you're competing, it's a little bit different, but I think it's just pretty much the same formula. I haven't really followed any trends when it comes to dieting. I ended up like accidentally intermittently fasting for many, many years before it was even a thing, where basically, I get up really early for work, not really hungry, and you're just working throughout the day and you don't really have time to eat, or you lose momentum and then just eating one meal a day. And people were asking me like, "Oh my God, I heard you intermittent fast." I was like, "Well, not really. I don't know what that means." And I think it worked well for me. But then now that I have a little bit more time, I'm like eating more throughout the day, just eating like the normal meals throughout the day.
Gotcha. Yeah, a lot of people have said that, like they didn't know they were intermittent fasting because it wasn't a big thing until recently, I think.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Right. And so people are like, I didn't eat until maybe noon or something like that. And then I figured out I was intermittent fasting, which is cool. I think there's definitely a place for fasting. It's an interesting concept to play around with. Have you ever done any long fasts before? Like anything?
I haven't. My wife has. So I think once a year she'll do something with like, when you have like lemon juice or something, or lime. And it's basically a water fast essentially in tea. And she says it's great, but I've never done it myself.
Yeah, and neither have I. I don't think I need to just yet. Maybe when I get older or something.
Yeah, and I've always found my mind is clearer when I'm hungry. So I think like having less food in general, I think we may overconsume. And any times I've just not been able to eat because of busyness with work, I just felt sharper, not lethargic at all, just like sharper and just clearer when I actually had less calorie intake.
Do you eat before you train usually?
Rarely.
Rarely. Gotcha. So kind of fast and then you'll train and then eat something after?
Yeah,
Maybe?
sometimes. Yeah. So if I feel like I have appetite, then I'll eat. And then these days I'm trying to put on some weight. So I'm like kind of like forcing myself to eat, which is miserable. Like it's tough, like trying to eat like just the rice, let's say vegetables and the meat, eat that meal. All right, try to drink a protein shake. All right. It's actually really hard to like consume that much food, I found. Like,
Yeah, it's tough. If you're trying to put on weight, especially like if you're doing jujitsu and burning a lot of
yeah.
calories, it's really, really tough to eat a lot of food and put on weight. Do you do any type of strength and conditioning off the mats? Any type of weightlifting or anything
None
like
at all
that?
right now. I'm going to start again. I did a lot in the past, whether it's kettlebells or Olympic lifting. And I think I just kind of like fell out of the habit when I got busier with work. But when I was younger and competing more and training more, I definitely had like strength conditioning. But I think these days now, it's really just going to be strength conditioning, not to necessarily get significantly stronger, just more for just like general body, just a little bit, just to kind of protect your body better. And then maybe more like stretching, I think, and mobility work, just to extend the longevity.
Yeah, longevity and injury prevention,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, that's huge. I think that's like my number one reason why I lift weights off the mats is just injury prevention
Yeah.
in general. So when do you take any type of supplements or anything like that? Any creatine, any collagen, any,
I just started taking creatine.
Really?
Yeah, I just started taking creatine.
Okay. What made you start?
It had been suggested by a bunch of people. My wife started taking it. It was suggested by, she had someone helping her with her fitness as well. And that it was supposed to be heavily researched and really, really helpful. So I take that once a day.
Nice. Any other supplements, any plant medicines, anything like that? That's awesome. Really clean, really, really straightforward. I like that.
Straightforward. Yeah.
That's amazing.
And it's not like I'm against them at all. So if someone suggests something that's good, I'll try it. And if it's helpful, and with these things, I think that once you take them, they kind of work right away. You can kind of tell if it works for your body. I definitely would take them, whether it's like glucosamine or collagen or things like that. I would do it, but I just don't.
Gotcha. Do you drink coffee? Are you a coffee guy?
I'm not a coffee person at all.
No kidding.
Yeah.
No caffeine whatsoever?
I drink tea sometimes, but no coffee at all.
Gotcha.
I drank coffee in the past, so I actually really like the taste of coffee. But I think I made a decision, and this is many years ago, where I'd read an article in the New York Times or something where it said like the average New Yorker drinks 11 cups of coffee a day. When we say 11, I think it's the ounces are smaller. So it's like if you had a big thing from Starbucks, that would count as multiple cups when it came to cup measurement. And I think I just made a decision where I never wanted to take caffeine artificially to make me more productive, just for the sake of doing it. And I know that caffeine has health benefits and it's not unhealthy necessarily, but I kind of want to just be like, this is the energy I have today and I'll work through it. And if I'm a little bit more tired on one day, that's fine. I'll have more energy on another day. I thought that using more, whether it's like you're excited about something or enthusiastic about something, gives you far more energy. Like when I'm coming to jiu-jitsu, whether it's to teach or to train, the coffee doesn't like boost me. It's like the fact that I'm so excited to be here, to see my friends, to get on the mats, to get some rounds in. That's enough, almost like it's the energy boost from like a coffee, for example.
That's amazing. The natural energy that you get, and just sheer willpower too. Like when you're not feeling energized, just getting up and actually getting to the training.
Right, and then just being like, it's okay to be down sometimes. I think that there's nothing wrong with caffeine, but I just don't want it to be a thing where I have to wake up and then do this thing or need one a little bit later. And for some people, it's the ritual. Some people love it. I do love the taste of coffee. I think it's great. If someone wants to have a coffee, I'll have a nice coffee with them, but I just don't use it as a daily part of my life.
Yeah, no, respect. That's awesome. Do you have any cool projects you're working on? Anything coming up? Anything you're interested in kind of putting some time and energy into right now, or just focused on training mostly?
Yeah, I think just focused on this now because it's been about a year that I've been doing this, so it's been nice to really kind of make a shift to focus on students more. I think, and then I've started helping coach some students now for tournaments and things like that. A lot of times jiu-jitsu is personal. It's like a personal journey, personal development. But now being able to shift my focus to how can I help people learn better? How can I support them in other ways on the mats besides just showing them a technique has been really nice. So it's almost kind of like learning the other side of things. I think that you kind of have to make that shift mentally. When you first start training, or even as a competitor, you have to be selfish in many, many ways. Not saying you're a bad person for being selfish, but selfish with your time, selfish with what you can give. But then once you make a shift to a coach, it's like you have to be more selfless. And a lot of the things you study or do is to make the classes better, to try to broaden your knowledge so you can be more helpful to your students.
That's amazing. Yeah, really focusing on your students is
Yeah.
huge as a coach. I really, you can tell the difference when you have a coach who cares about their students and the success of their students
Right.
versus a coach who just shows up to collect a paycheck.
Yeah,
You know what
exactly.
I'm saying? So that's awesome. I have a question for you. So if you could have dinner with 3 people, dead or alive, separate dinners, who would they be? I know it's kind of putting you on the spot,
Yeah.
but I'm curious. Who would you have dinner with?
One of them would have to be my grandmother, the one I didn't meet from my paternal, just because she passed away young when my father was young. He's always said some really wonderful things about her, and I think it'd be really nice to speak to her and then hear her story and how she grew up. So I think that would be a big one for me. The other two, I mean, it's tough to say.
Yeah.
I think one maybe what you're to get out of me. I think the other two, there's always historical figures that might be interesting. Then you leave out other ones, and I think that would be the one that I could think of right away. That someone I never got to meet, but I heard great things about, and I would love to meet.
That's amazing. Yeah, I feel the same way about my grandfather on my father's side. I never got to meet him, my great grandfather, and I've heard amazing things about him, and that I'm a lot like him too. So I can understand where you're coming from with that for sure. And what type of advice would you give to lower belts? On the come up, or maybe just starting, white, blue, even purple belts who just want to get better and are trying to focus on their game, and this is a big part of their life.
Yeah, so I think one thing, because I think a lot of people speak about this topic but I think the easiest way for me to articulate it is to almost look at it, like break it down by belt level a little bit, but then also look at it from a perspective of like what's happening. So one thing I tell students a lot is at the white belt level, you're just going to get beat, right? So one thing you can focus on is defense. So you have cross-side escapes, mount escapes, back escapes. You just have to get really, really good at that. Of course, you still keep getting better at those as the level of difficulty increases, you start working with better people. But that's like the best starting point. I think a lot of people, when they first start out, they're trying to get that silver bullet, that edge, that move that someone else doesn't know to try to get there. So the first thing, if you can escape and get back to guard regularly, that's when you're starting to get towards, and I look at this as my own development. So as a white belt, of course, you're also submitting some other friends sometimes, but there are other white belts, and sometimes you get to their back and you choke them. Sometimes you armbar them. But generally, most of the time, you're just escaping position. And after that, you get to guard. So now when you're in the guard position, I think at blue belt is when you start really working from the bottom and from guard. And closed guard is a great starting point. Eventually, you're forced to, because they open your guard, or you recover only to half guard to start developing guard. And it's about guard retention and then starting to get some sweeps and maybe submissions if you can. And then after that, you start regularly getting sweeps. So when I got to purple belt, I eventually starting to learn how to pass properly. And I think purple belt was when I got more confident in being able to sweep regularly and then starting to pass. So, white belt, we learned passes, but I didn't really spend much time passing. Blue belt, we learned passes, but I didn't spend much time passing. And then, purple belt, you can sweep more, so then you're really working your passing game as a purple belt. And then brown belt is when you're more confident in being able to sweep someone, being able to pass them, and then you start working on submissions more. And then black belt is when you're finally putting some things together, but getting submissions. I remember and this could be inaccurate because I'm sure it happened, but I don't think I regularly got the cross collar choke from the back until I was a black belt, because I would never be able to get to the back up to that point and then even hold it long enough. But I recall in my head back then when I got my black belt being like, man, I'm getting cross collar choke more. Did I learn it as a white belt? Of course. Did I learn it as a blue belt? So if you look at that development where you start with all defense first and then all guard retention, then adding some sweeps and submissions and back takes, as they will come when you're playing guard from that level of blue belt, and then purple belts when you really start getting much better at passing, and then it's like brown belt, black belt that you actually start fine-tuning your combinations and submissions, can be a good way of looking at things. So it kind of gives you signposts of what you really should be working on right now.
That's amazing. That's like a structure to the journey almost right there. I've never heard that before. That's awesome. I really like it. Why don't you go ahead and tell everybody where they could find you at? If you like, you teach here at Renzo Gracie Academy.
Yes, yeah, Renzo Gracie Academy here. Mm-hmm. So I'm here full time now. My Instagram handle, which I'm sure you probably put in, is at Criminal Defense Butcher, defense with a C. And I'm always happy to talk to people. If you have any questions for me, please reach out.
Absolutely. Awesome. Professor Jason, it was amazing talking to you. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Looking forward to the next time we do this.
Yep, great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was amazing. I did not